All right, guys, so we have some new information on Luigi Magione, the suspected shooter of the United Healthcare CEO. Now, this is his mugshot here, the picture that's been floating around. And we also have, as reported by, I believe, the first person to get their hands on it here, independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, of the manifesto that was reportedly found on him at the time of his arrest. Now, he ended up being found because apparently somebody at a McDonald's, there was like this bus that he was on in Pennsylvania. They went to this McDonald's to have lunch. Somebody spotted him and said, I think that matches up to some of the pictures I've been seeing of like his mask pulled down when he was in New York City and going to a hostel. And so somebody reported him at this McDonald's in Pennsylvania. He ended up being arrested, and apparently this was the manifesto that was found on him at the time. They also found, I believe, a 3D printed gun and then a few other things as well. But let's just go ahead and read this short little, excerpt that he had to say in terms of like why he did this, right? And then we'll get to more of his background and potential motive and all of that stuff, right? So he says here, to the feds, I'll keep this short because I do respect what you do for our country. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial, some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, and a lot of patience. The spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. Now, he does have a computer science background. I think that's what he got his major in. He has a pretty, elite background, right? Comes from a relatively wealthy, well-known family in Baltimore, apparently. And he graduated in computer science and has an interesting political background as well, kind of all over the place, but also decipherable if you have some sort of an understanding of online politics. It's like he's sort of like a tech bro, semi-right wing, but also has anti-corporate, anti-capitalist tendencies. Kind of an interesting guy, but he continues. He says, I do apologize for any strife of traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder, the US has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, true, yet we rank roughly 42nd in life expectancy. I don't know if those numbers are precisely correct in terms of the US ranking number 42, but we certainly do have the most expensive healthcare system in the world, and our life expectancy is drastically lower than other comparable, developed nations. He says United, this, obviously the company of the CEO that he killed, is, and then they say indecipherable, the largest company in the US by market cap behind only Apple, Google, and Walmart. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No. The reality is these, again, indecipherable, I guess you could say these companies have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument, but many have illuminated the corruption and greed decades ago, and the problems simply remain. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. And he finishes off saying, evidently, I am the first one to face it with such brutal honesty. So, listen, guys, the core points of what he's getting at here, you can't really argue with, right? You could have a debate about, it's not good to just go and shoot people and murder people in broad daylight in the middle of the street. Okay. But in terms of his broader points on the flaws, the greed, the corruption, the power games that are at play in the U.S. healthcare system, in the U.S. political system, all of this is out in the open. As he pointed out there, United Healthcare has one of the largest market caps in the entire country. How is that possible? We're talking about a health insurance company. Their profits come from average working class Americans, paying them monthly, paying them, on a regular basis, just for them to get absolutely fucked over whenever they actually need healthcare, right? United Healthcare's profits go up the more that they deny people care, right? And so you have other stats that I pointed out in previous videos, like United Healthcare having one of, if not the single highest rates of denials of claims of any other major U.S. health insurance companies. I think it was hovering at around 32, 34% denial rates. You also have reports of United Healthcare using artificial intelligence that has a massive error rate of up to 90% and using that AI program to deny people care. You also have specific allegations of insider trading that were levied previously in some investigations that were taking place against the CEO, Brian Thompson, who ended up being killed. So his analysis here, I guess, of the U.S. healthcare system, I mean, it's kind of straightforward, right? I mean, this is how the U.S. economy works. This is how the U.S. political system works, is we have an entirely dysfunctional healthcare industry where profit is put above healthcare, where profit is put above people, and the same companies like United that are profiting to the tune of tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, then turn around and use the money that they are taking off of our backs to fund the campaigns of our politicians, who then turn around and do their bidding and refuse to change the status quo, right? It's not really a complicated analysis here, and I mean, he even admits in it that he's not really qualified to do the full analysis, but it's like, a lot of this is pretty simple shit, right? Now, how do you get to the point where you end up going and murdering somebody in broad daylight? That takes it to a different level, and they have some more information here in a second in terms of what potentially could have motivated him as an individual to go and carry out this act. But I wanted to show you guys this video. This is him being taken to an extradition hearing in Pennsylvania, and you can see him being brought out by the police from this car, and he shouts something out here.
And it's completely out of touch, and it's an insult to the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience.
So it seems like what he said there is something like, it's completely ridiculous. You're out of touch. This is about lived experience. They have a quote here in the CNN article that I'll get to here in a second, but he's yelling and shouting as he's being brought into the courtroom there. Let's go ahead and move on, because we have some more information in terms of lining up that this guy is most likely, almost certainly the shooter here, and some more information on his background and what potentially led to all of this. So they say here from CNN that the gun the CEO killing suspect, Luigi Magione, had when he was arrested this week in Pennsylvania matches the shell casings that were found at the crime scene last week in Midtown Manhattan. So if you remember, the shell casing said, I believe, deny, depose, defend, or something like that, which is a common, phrase in the healthcare industry, again, to try to deny you healthcare as much as possible to maximize their profits. So he apparently wrote those messages on the casings of the bullets that he used against the CEO, which is pretty wild shit. I mean, that's some shit that a super villain movie character would do, right? We also had other reporting that he apparently left his backpack in a part of Central Park that contained basically a jacket and Monopoly money. So, I mean, clearly this guy had planned this in advance. He had a very clear message that he wanted to send. And I think it's honestly still up in the air as to whether or not he was trying to be found, because in some ways, when you look at the details of the things that were on his person when he was finally found by the police, like he had like a 3D printed gun and he had, this notebook and the manifesto and everything else, it's almost questionable, because it's like when he was found, the police in New York really didn't know who the potential shooter was. So the fact that he had all of that on him and didn't ditch it beforehand, and the fact that he gave a fake ID that matched up to the hostel that he was staying at in New York, the same ID that he used there, that's almost what led to him getting arrested, right? So it seems like he was very close, if not almost guaranteed, to potentially get away with this had he not been found with the stuff that he had on him when he was actually arrested. But they continue here. They say, fingerprints found at the scene of the assassination match those of Luigi, according to two law enforcement officials who were briefed on this. They say the development comes as authorities dig into Magione, who remains in custody in Pennsylvania on gun-related charges as he fights this extradition to New York, where he's going to be charged with murder. So they say since his arrest on Monday, thanks to a tipster, again at a McDonald's, the 26-year-old's background is starting to come into focus. So they say that he is a privileged scion of a well-to-do family. He's a high school valedictorian and an Ivy League graduate who vanished from the view of his loved ones in recent months, only to emerge as a suspect in this high-profile killing, potentially fueled by his struggle with a painful back injury. So that's what it seems like people are circling around as potentially what led to his major frustrations with the industry here. But they say that Mangione's lawyer, and this is interesting here, has denied his client's involvement in the killing in New York and anticipates that he will plead not guilty to the murder charge, among other counts. So this is a direct quote from his lawyer. He says, "I haven't seen any evidence that they have the right guy." So, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what exactly the strategy is here. Maybe this is just basic stuff where, if you're representing your client, you're going to say that he's not guilty. I don't really know. You guys tell me. But it seems like if you're found with the stuff that he was found with, like a manifesto that we just went over outlining exactly why he did this, that it seems pretty clear that this is the guy, unless they just have completely the wrong person, or I don't really understand what the argument is there that he didn't do the killing. Now, maybe you could make a case that, there's a broader context to it and a broader conversation that needs to be had about the inhumane and brutal and barbaric nature of the U.S. healthcare industry. That's its own conversation that I've gotten into before and, probably talk more about here in a second. But I don't know how you plead not guilty in this kind of a situation. I don't know. But they continue. They say, in some of his writings, he referenced pain from a back injury that he got back in July of last year, according to NYPD detectives. They say that some of the writings he was discussing the difficulty of sustaining that injury, so we're looking into whether or not the insurance industry either denied a claim from him or didn't help to the fullest extent. Wouldn't be out of the ordinary if that was the case, right? To say the least. Again, United Healthcare has one of the highest rates of denials in the corrupt and dysfunctional and dystopian U.S. health insurance industry. Now, they also say here, quote, that as he entered the courthouse, now this is the quote that we just watched here. They're, describing what their interpretation of it was, that Luigi apparently said, "It's completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people. It's lived experience." Now, I'll let you guys interpret, what you're taking away from that. Seems kind of straightforward. He's saying that I guess the establishment is out of touch or the media is out of touch or whatever the case may be, and that his lived experience led to him potentially taking this action. Now, they also have some more information here in terms of what he was found with on his person at this Altoona McDonald's. They say that they found a black 3D printed pistol and a black silencer that was also 3D printed. They say that while being taken into custody, he also presented this forged New Jersey ID with the name Mark Rosario, which again matched the ID that the man at the hostel used. Now, one of the other layers that makes this extra interesting here is that a few days ago, the NYPD, Eric Adams, they came out and they said, "We know the name of our top suspect," right? That was the claim that they made, but they said, "We're not going to release that name because we don't want to give him an upper hand." And at the time, everybody was looking at that and they're like, the fuck are you talking about? You know the name, but you're not going to release it? That none of that makes any sense. I'm calling cap. I don't believe that you know the name of this guy. But the fact that they potentially lied about that and essentially did a bluff by saying, "We know what your name is," that actually may have led to Luigi giving this false ID instead of his real ID when the police showed up to this McDonald's in Altoona. So the bluff may have worked. I don't know. I don't know why you would give the same ID, which is a fake ID that the cops can immediately go and run and realize that it's fake, and you would give them the same ID that you used at the hostel. That to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I guess unless he, maybe it's, I don't know, this first thing he pulled out of his wallet, or, he was scared of giving them the real ID because he thought the police had his actual name because that's what they were saying. But, again, a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Now, they continue. They say that what he was found with, this notebook, included to-do lists to facilitate a killing, as well as notes justifying those plans, the source said. In one notebook page, Magione wrote about the late Ted Kaczynski, the so-called Unabomber who justified a deadly bombing campaign as an effort to protect against the onslaught of technology and exploitation. And they also say that he's written about the Unabomber in online posts as well. Now, you can actually go and look at his Goodreads account where he's given reviews of some of the books that he's read, and that in and of itself is pretty interesting. There are some books that are on like managing back pain and the corruption in the health insurance industry or healthcare industry, and then there were other books like The Lorax, which he gave 5 stars, and then there were other books like Ted Kaczynski's writings that he gave, I think it was 4 stars, and he wrote a review where he, I think, essentially outlined the concept that, if reform is not working, violence may be the necessity, right? That may be the only thing that you are left with. So it seems like maybe that had a potential influence on him as well. Now, they continue because that part of it gets a little bit more interesting here. They say that Mangione concluded that using a bomb, so he had initially said, maybe I'll use a bomb to kill the CEO, apparently. But then he said using a bomb against his intended victim could kill innocents, and shooting would be more targeted, using what would be better to kill the CEO at his own bean counting conference, right? So at the time, the CEO of United was going to a conference. I don't know if it was like a shareholder conference or a company conference or whatever the case may be, but it looks like Luigi was floating the idea of potentially using a bomb to kill him and then said, I don't want to kill innocent civilians, so I'm going to go with the shooting route, right? Which you could make a case puts him, morally above the IDF, for example, that has been indiscriminately bombing civilians with U.S. taxpayer-funded dollars and weapons for over a year straight of the genocide in Gaza that we have been supporting, funding, arming, giving diplomatic cover for, etc. Now, the reason I bring up that comparison is because I've seen people like John Fetterman, Josh Shapiro, many others as well, who are totally up in arms at the reaction from the public that seems to be relatively positive towards Luigi. And I'm looking at these guys and they're speaking as though, well, killing innocent people is the most abhorrent thing anybody could ever do. There is no justification for this. No two ways about it. And I'm like, aren't you the same guys who have been justifying continuing to send weapons to blow up innocent Palestinian children for over a year now? I mean, Josh Shapiro was signing bombs. He was putting his signature on bombs, right, that are being used against civilians. And now we're all up in arms about the idea of using violence to serve some sort of a political goal or agenda. Okay, I mean, seems like a little bit of hypocrisy there, if you ask me. Now, I'll link this CNN article down below if you want to go get some more of the other details that were floating around. One last thing here is we had his Twitter profile. Now, if you see down here, he has almost 200,000 followers. That's not actually accurate. He started out, the first time that I found his account, I was pretty early to it. And the first time I checked his account, it had like 700 followers. Then I refreshed an hour later after the news came out. He had 60,000 followers. Then it went up to, close to 200,000 followers, et cetera, et cetera. So rapidly growing following there on Twitter. But the reason I bring this up is because if you look at his banner picture here, he's got him over here, kind of a Chad, guy is absolutely shredded and jacked. Can't really take that away from him. He's got a Pokemon over here. And in the middle, you have this image of what appears to be his, potentially his spinal surgery. I don't know if he actually got the spinal surgery or maybe this is just a generalized picture to get at the point of his back pain that he had been suffering from. But I mean, that's the gist of it, guys. That's most of the latest information that we have right now, right? You have a guy comes from a wealthy background, interesting politically, at least kind of all over the place, but also it kind of makes sense the more that you look into it. Potentially had a severe back injury and back pain and potentially got screwed over by United Healthcare or the health insurance industry generally, and sort of went dark. His family, his friends didn't really know where he was, and then ended up pulling this off. So tell me what you guys think. I don't know. I think all of this is very interesting. And the response from the American people, I think, is emblematic in and of itself at the rage and the anger towards the dysfunctional, corrupted U.S. healthcare industry, where essentially we put, again, profits over people. The goal of companies like United Healthcare is to profit off of screwing you over, off of putting you into bankruptcy, putting you into debt, potentially costing you or your loved ones your lives because you can't afford to receive healthcare. And the answer to this is Medicare for All, which is a single-payer health insurance program funded by the government, free at the point of service care, and it would save lives in, based on this story, more than one way. I'll just leave it at that.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying